Okay, we might kick off and start the session. Thank you to my co-presenters or the presenters for joining us this afternoon, Jacinta, Piers and Zoe. This session is the next in our series of Smart Places Masterclasses, where today we're going to focus on maturity models and the discussion about really honest self-assessment and having open conversations around where we are on our journeys. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting in a virtual space and acknowledge that each of us are meeting on the lands of many different Aboriginal nations. I myself am on Barramadigal land today and would like to kick off this meeting by acknowledging all of the traditional custodians of all of the Aboriginal nations and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that respect to our Aboriginal colleagues who have joined us today. I'd also like to thank the ACS for their ongoing collaboration with DeepEye in running this series of masterclasses. A couple of other really minor points to note as we start off. Please remain on mute and post questions in the chat when we'll curate that when we get to the sort of open forum at the end of the session. This evening's event will be recorded and we'll let you know where access will be to that recording at the conclusion of the session. Just some housekeeping. Today we're going to hear from Zoe Ether first up. Then we're going to have a bit of a presentation on understanding smart cities maturity frameworks. We've got an interactive portion where we'll have a Mentimeter for some voting and facilitated discussion around that. And then the last half of the session will really be a panel Q&A and discussion. Just before we get into that, I'd like to just tell you a little bit more about the people you'll be hearing from today. Firstly, Jacinta Hagen. Jacinta is a partner at KPMG and is the lead technology partner for New South Wales Government, working with departments to connect services to citizens through the use of digital and technology. Jacinta spent 6 years of her career within the New South Wales Government, primarily at Transport for New South Wales, and was a chair of the New South Wales Government's working group that provided input to the Smart Cities strategy. Understandably, Jacinta has a particular focus on mobility aspects of smart places, and she's worked across all states and internationally in this regard. Welcome, Jacinta. Piers Hogarth Scott is a partner at KPMG and is the firm's national lead on Internet of Things. Piers works with senior business leaders to reimagine and reinvent their organisations to become world-class digital enterprises using advanced technologies, data and human insights. He's also chairman of the Executive Council of the IoTAA, the peak industry body representing the Internet of Things in Australia, working to accelerate the adoption of IoT across the economy and society. Welcome, Piers. And finally, and certainly not least, Zoe Ether. Zoe is an experienced consultant, Churchill Fellow, and an engineer specialising in smart communities, and that is using different ways of thinking and technology as enablers to make the places we live more accessible, livable, and sustainable for all of us. Zoe is the CEO of My Smart Community, host of the Smart Community podcast, and Vice President of the Australian Smart Communities Association. Zoe also loves yoga and karaoke, although I don't know how she fits them in with all the other things she does. Welcome, Zoe. I think this is a really great panel and I encourage you to ask them really hard questions that will test them later on. But before that, I'm really keen to hear from Zoe and have her talk about the changing narrative in smart places. So over to you, Zoe.
Thank you, Simon. And I know everyone's first question is probably, what's my karaoke song? And it is Dancing Queen, although I have been known to belt out Zombie as well. So if anyone wants to do that whenever they're in Toowoomba or anywhere else, do let me know. It's one of my favourite things to do. But enough of that silliness. We're going to go straight into something very serious. So my name is Zoe Ether and I do whatever it takes to shift and influence the smart city conversation, which often focuses on technology. So we want to shift to a smart community one which focuses on the people. Smart communities use new ways of thinking and technology as enablers to make the places we work, live and play more accessible, livable and sustainable for all. So as Simon mentioned, I am the CEO of My Smart Community and host the Smart Community podcast, and I am a volunteer at the Australian Smart Communities Association on the board of directors as the vice president. ASCA, we call ourselves for short. So ASCA exists to serve government interests and is majority funded by government partners, with strong membership across Australia, especially in local government. So we are a not-for-profit organisation with a clear focus on serving all levels of government and the community. So effective and reliable smart community initiatives really need strong organisations and skilled people. We need to maintain and build upon the existing capacity and knowledge to support effective responses by government, industry and academia in this space of technological change and policy change and all the things that come with that. So as you can see on the screen here, this is our board, and we've expanded the board this year to better reflect the many different types of communities that we have, and each of the people here on the board bring those different skills, critically important skills and experience. So you can see their email addresses here if you want to jot those down. We'll also have those in the pack later on, so you don't need to madly rush those, write those down now. You can also use that QR code and that will take you directly to our website. So just quickly, we've got Adam Mullen, who's president. He's been on the board for a couple of years now. We've got Kim Hunt from City of Adelaide, or recently from City of Adelaide. Simon Hunter, which you'll all know. James Peat from Moreton Bay Regional Council. We have Laura Baker. We have Imogen Shifley and Nathaniel Mason, and Chris Rowlands as well, who is formerly from Bendigo. Bendigo City Council, is now working for NBN. So as I said, you can see the email addresses there, and we're available for all of our member organisations to discuss opportunities and challenges. Reach out to us. We are really keen to chat. And it's not just our commitment, I guess, to smart communities, but we also share your passion for smart communities. So please feel free to reach out. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm an engineer, a traditional one. I used to be a traditional one, in civil and environmental. I started off in hydraulics, but really wanted to get out on site. So I went out west to work in road construction and worked my way up to being a project manager. So I've worked on many different things in many different places, particularly across regional Queensland. I then came to Toowoomba, where I currently live, to work on the Toowoomba Second Range Crossing, which, for those of you who don't know, is a $1.6 billion road construction project, which is now finished and bypasses the town of Toowoomba. Now, I was on this project, but I really wanted to work overseas. And seemingly, as soon as that thought entered my head, an email landed in my inbox. It was from our Director General. So I was working for Transport and Main Roads at the time, which is the state government agency in Queensland, saying he'd just been to South Korea and was really excited about the technology. And he wanted to send one of his engineers over there. So I applied for that opportunity and was fortunate enough to be selected. So then I lived in South Korea for 3 months, and this is where I learned and really immersed myself in smart cities, as well as self-driving cars and innovative construction methodologies. This photo here is from South Korea. They're building a new bridge. So when I came back to Australia, I was working in the state government still, and I got a job in the cooperative and automated vehicle initiative, so self-driving cars. But I was a bit obsessed with smart cities. I would ask anyone and everyone, some people are on this call today, about smart cities. It really wouldn't leave me alone. So I decided to start a podcast, which would then give me this platform to be able to continue to learn, but also build this community around it, mainly so I'd have more people to talk to about it. Now, it turns out you can't have podcasts and be a public servant at the time. So I left my good, secure government job to do this podcast. And because you can't eat passion forever, I started my own consultancy, which focuses on taking the overwhelm of this smart conversation, particularly in regional areas. Now, I mentioned that because what I've discovered by working with local government, actually different levels of government, on building these smart strategies and also looking at implementation, is that when people are stuck in this state of confusion, we're actually unable to move forward. And without being able to move forward, no amount of smart technology can help us. So I've also discovered that when we are able to share knowledge and stories across government industries, we can actually work to solve some of these really big, wicked problems that we're all talking about. So the world's biggest problems will be solved by smart communities. And this is the narrative that we want to build, so then we can build this future that is inclusive, diverse, and prosperous. That is, again, using new ways of thinking, technology, and data as enablers to make these places that we want. So I shifted my language from smart cities to communities in 2018 because the word city is not as inclusive as it could be, because I wanted to have more people involved in that conversation, in this conversation. And when we talk about cities, it draws a focus to the big cities and leaves the regional areas out of the conversation. We also talk a lot about physical things when we talk about cities. And so today I really want to encourage us to use smart places and communities, because to me, community automatically means people, and it feels like everyone can be part of this conversation because we all belong to different communities and different places. Now, it is about the people, but technology and data are the enablers, so it's still important, because the wonderful and terrible thing about technology is that it changes everything. And we are living in this world enabled by technology. And we're going to be forced to reimagine what the future is for our communities. And our communities will need us to apply these skills and also develop new skills as we need to solve more and more problems. More opportunities and challenges will be heading our way. So we need more of us to join this smart communities and places conversation. So the narrative that smart cities and communities is all about new cool tech and driven by big tech companies needs to go and replace with one which is about solving real problems for real people. That it isn't separate from traditional projects. It's actually a new approach to solving problems. So recently I've been working on a very traditional project, a new public transport network. And they knew, however, that if they wanted this to be a successful project, which was to come online in 2026, they would need a digital and smart city strategy, or a smart community strategy. Now, they needed this to be developed and baked into the traditional planning, design, and business case. And doing this now allows for digital to be implemented from the start and not seen as an add-on later, so that things can be planned for and allowed for right now. Future-proofing, some may say, but it's actually really now-proofing if we want an attractive, modern, relevant transport network. And digital can't be this add-on. It has to be connected throughout the whole process, which is why we need engineers, planners, designers, professionals of all types, embedding the smart community approach from the beginning. And it's also important to plan out what is required and desired, because not every community will be the same, and the technology and data has to have a use and a purpose. Now, I know it's been a while since most of us have seen the inside of a plane, and it actually truly seems like a lifetime ago, but from March to May in 2019, I went on a Winston Churchill Fellowship. So I was able to travel all around the world and explore smart communities. So I went to, as you can see, San Francisco, Mexico, Toronto, Orlando, Denver, London, Dublin, Amsterdam, very briefly to Copenhagen, Barcelona, Cape Town, and Johannesburg in South Africa, Jeju Island, and Seoul in South Korea. Now, I chose these places because I wanted a mix of environments, or what you might call maturity in the smart city space. And I chose these places because I had interviewed people from these places on the podcast who were doing really interesting things. Some things were quite big, other things were really small. Now, for example, in Orlando, Florida, okay, yes, I also wanted to go to the Harry Potter theme park, but I had interviewed the director of sustainability from the city of Orlando about some of the things that they were doing, and they were really taking this sustainability approach to smart cities. So it wasn't a traditional, or I guess traditional smart city approach, but they were really focusing on sustainability. So they started with a community program called Green Works, and they invested in electric public and free public transport in the city, increased active transport, and floating solar. And it wasn't your typical smart city, as I was saying, but it was actually about solving the real problems that they had, coupled with this lens of where they wanted to go and what kind of place they really wanted to be. So in 2019, Orlando was rated the #1 dangerous by design for pedestrians, which is not a title you want to have. So they really wanted to change that. So they invested in cycling infrastructure, a shared bike scheme, using data to make better decisions around intersections. They activated places along the train corridor. These are just a few things that they did. And did they get everything right? Well, no, nobody does. And are they finished yet? Well, definitely not. But they started where they were and looked at the real problems they were trying to solve. And with the lens of sustainability, they built a program of works and kept going, and also started to spread the word and told people about it, told people what they were up to. So this wasn't a case of, oh, yes, okay, this new technology is now available, so we can do X. Or we now have all the systems in place, we can now do Y. Or even we understand all our data sources, so we can do Z. So they started where they were and continued to ask questions, focusing on solving some of their really big problems. And they decided on that lens of sustainability. So although I was focused on mobility in particular, I realized that smart communities come in all shapes and sizes. They're unique. And although they have common threads and are actually trying to solve some of the same problems, they look completely different to each other. It's both frightening and humbling to know that we're all suffering, all to varying degrees, but still trying to solve some of the same problems in our cities and in our regions and in our communities, which means that we can learn from each other. Even though the application will be unique to each of our communities, we can actually learn and share across borders and look at those different collaborations that could be had. So who would have thought 5 years ago that artificial intelligence and potholes would have something in common? Moreton Bay Regional Council in Queensland were one of the first councils to invest in using AI, artificial intelligence, to automatically detect potholes and other defects to improve their asset management process. By fitting waste trucks with dash cams, which use AI to process the video footage, the council is automating how it identifies and fixes road infrastructure. So the pothole hunter. So it all started with an idea and bringing the right people together, the council, the tech folk, and the translator. There were people in the council that could see with the right ingredients, the very traditional asset management process could be improved. The council could save real money, real time, and real resources, while also creating a safer and more efficient network for the community. Then we had the people with the technical capability and the available and capable technology. And they also happened to be a local startup. Then the translator, which were able to understand both sides and make communication in the middle flow more easily. And it started with a small pilot, just one camera installed on one maintenance ute to prove the concept, but now has expanded to 14 waste trucks, soon to be 28, and an electric bicycle for the footpaths as well. So they do it on both the roads and the footpaths, meaning that every week the council has an up-to-date understanding of the performance of their assets and has created this database that can be used for so many other things. Now, the data is not generated in a silo, it's integrated into the council's asset management system through an API, meaning that it can exchange data with how we collect, where we collect it, and then also their legacy asset management system. Which this enables defect records and work orders to be open, populated, and closed automatically. Now, before this system was in place, the council would undertake a yearly asset scan by an external contractor, but it would actually take 6 to 9 months for this data to be entered into the asset management system, meaning that prioritization of repairs for safety and to create efficiencies was really limited. Before the Pothole Hunter project, there were a similar number of road defect records in the system, but they were of limited use due to their age. Now there are over 27,000 records with a maximum age of 1 week, meaning that Moreton Bay Regional Council's management of their assets is more accurate, quality, and efficient. Now, not only this type of data set in terms of the amount, the accuracy and the timeliness has never been available before now. And now this council is looking at more ways to use it. For example, using this data to automate the very time and resource intensive road condition assessment process to enhance road resurfacing and rehabilitation decision making, enabling more timely intervention and therefore asset life extension. So it's not about fancy new tech, but it's about exploring the possibilities of how we can improve these very traditional processes, which is a pain point for many councils. And then using the tools that are available now and looking just beyond the horizon to assist us in solving even bigger problems. So we can apply this thinking to even bigger problems, the ones that are coming at us thick and fast, like whole communities that are severely impacted by flooding due to rising sea levels or increasing air pollution in our cities. We have to be curious to wonder if something can be done and then apply this rigor to be able to make sure it happens in a safe, high quality way and produces the desired outcomes. So start wherever you are, continue to ask questions, focused on working towards solving some of these real problems and decide on your lens. This is not about smart city projects, but rather it's using a smart approach to solve real problems for your community. Thank you very much. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Zoe. That was a great reflection, I think, and a really strong message to leave on. I'm hopeful that people are formulating questions for you as we speak. But now I'm going to hand over to Piers and Jacinta to run us through some of the thinking that they have on maturity models and self-assessment around that. So Piers, over to you, mate.
Great, thanks, Simon. I'll just load up some content. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, it's good, thank you.
Excellent. All right. So again, welcome everybody, and thank you for having Jacinta and I. Jacinta and I are going to do a bit of a double act today to share with you Smart Places maturity models and some methodologies and models that we work with when advising clients on their smart cities or smart places activities, if you like. But first of all, I'm just going to start with a definition, and there are many definitions, but for the purpose of what we're talking about today, a definition for a smart city. And please, I'm using the words smart cities, smart places, and smart communities as interchangeable descriptions, and I'm with Zoe that smart communities is probably the best all-encompassing one, but bear with us on that. But a smart, sustainable city is an innovative city that uses information and communication technologies and other means to improve quality of life, efficiency of urban operations and services, and competitiveness, whilst ensuring it meets the needs of present and future generations with respect to economic, social, and environmental aspects. And I think it's that last part that really refers to people and future generations with respect to economic, social, and environmental aspects. And I guess the innovation that's driven through the use of smart technologies. When we think about a maturity assessment and a model, the way that we approach it is that we have pulled together various assets, including our own thinking, but in addition, by also drawing on external data sets. A couple of those include TM Forum's Smart City Maturity and Benchmark model, and the model also draws on various ISO internationally recognized standards to ensure best practice is applied. So this is not something that has just been dreamt up. It is actually supported by standards, and also therefore enables us to to also undertake benchmarking on a global basis, so that communities can be compared with their peers across the world, to understand how they stack up. The reason that that we use these tools, or maturity assessment, if you like, is because it enables smart cities, places, and communities to benchmark their current state of where they sit on the maturity scale. And once you understand where you sit on that maturity scale, it then enables a discussion to talk about where you aspire to be, the future state, if you like, and then, of course, a discussion about how you're going to get from A to B. So that's really the purpose of this sort of tool. And the other thing, of course, is that there are various dimensions between where an organization is today versus where it wants to be in the future. Now, of course, everybody wants to be, should we call it, the best or the most advanced in the future, but that's not always practical or obtainable within a relative period of time. So some decisions need to be made about what's realistic in terms of where you aspire to be, and considerations and investments that need to be made along the way to get organisations there. We have 5 key dimensions that we use in the maturity model. They are leadership and governance. So that's about understanding the breadth and depth of city leadership, the efficiency of city management, the commitment of organisations to learn from best practice, and also the management of relevant initiatives, and the transformational mindset that the cities approach. Point 2 is around stakeholder engagement and citizen focus. So what are the needs of stakeholders, the needs of citizens, the needs of businesses around the smart city initiatives? What's the strength of these communities? What's the social equity? Collaboration that's been driven with third parties and the broader ecosystem. The third dimension is the effective use of data. So is data available? Is it open? Is it being shared? What's the level of interoperability, with the thorny issue of interoperability that comes up time and time again? And what are the common standards around privacy, security, data analytics, so on and so forth? The fourth dimension is around the integrated ICT infrastructure. So to what extent are assets that are deployed and linked to ultimately designed to deliver those city services, and to what extent is there a city or a community-wide architecture that supports that, and to what extent is there an embracement of open standards and advanced technologies such as cloud computing and so on and so forth. And then the fifth and final dimension is around the existing level of smartness in inverted commas. So in other words, to what extent are cities and communities using the power of data to transform the way it manages its core infrastructure? So whether that's the facilities, the buildings, the roads, the core services, the overall environment, the external interfaces and dependencies. So what is the existing level of smartness that brings that all about? So the way that we do this is that we have a pretty extensive set of questions that we use to interrogate organisations. I think there's around about 225 particular variables that are used in it, and then they're measured against a scale to understand where they sit on that level of maturity, from not at all mature to very, very advanced. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jacinta, who will provide some visibility of those particular dimensions across those 5 levels.
Thanks, Piers. And can I just check that everybody can see the slide 7 in full screen?
I'm on slide 6.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
Brilliant. Great. Thank you. Okay, so so Piers, and I'll just pop my video on as well. So Piers has just taken you through the 5 dimensions at a high level. I'm going to take you through these in a little more detail before we get the chance to actually put them into practice. So one of the things that I think is particularly useful about this model is, as Piers said, a city or a place or community can assess both their current state and their desired state. So let's go through it in a little bit more detail. So that first dimension is around leadership. This dimension really focuses on the commitment of that city or place to being smart. Is there a vision, dedicated funding, clear goals, and is there an upskilling of staff included within that vision? How effective is the city at managing itself? So are there measures associated with those goals? Is there a process to listen to citizens and drive that continuous improvement? And are they keen to look outside to learn from best practice and take transformational steps forward? The second dimension is focused on the citizen and key stakeholders. So how effectively does the city or place engage with their citizens to understand what is most important to them? Are they able to capture that feedback and then tailor their services to how well their citizens are responding to those initiatives? Are there teams on the ground incentivized and supported to think about citizens first? And is there a level of co-design with the broader community to ensure that all needs are met and that designs are inclusive? Not trying to do everything yourself is really important. And so effective engagement with the community to garner support and ensure their involvement and support is critical. And this could be local businesses, contracted service providers. It's thinking about that whole ecosystem. The third dimension is focused on the effective use of data. And this really starts with that clear strategy around the capture, use, and sharing of data. Now, we've seen how effective the open sharing of data can be. When I worked for Transport for New South Wales, open data was one of my responsibilities, and the number of products and services that have been delivered by third parties using that transport data is significant, and it's delivered services that probably transport wouldn't have been able to do. But this has to be done in a manner that is secure by design and takes into account the privacy requirements. Done badly or even communicated badly, data collection and sharing can be the downfall of any smart city initiative. And of course, something that's fundamental to this is that interoperability and that the use of standards is critical. The fourth dimension focuses on that integrated ICT infrastructure that supports all those various initiatives and the data strategy. So having a clear view of the architecture of the city's technology is as important as the plans of land use. Given the fluid and distributed nature of many smart place initiatives, it's really important that there is, at the right point, a central view of how this all fits together, and that the various responsible parties are working together to ensure that interoperability and the integration of all elements of the smart city solutions, whether that be lighting, sensors, or anything. Bringing together the data for all these components is what really drives the interconnectedness and enables the insights for a city or a place to be truly smart and reach that level of maturity. So the first 4 dimensions of this model allow cities and places to assess their capabilities that are necessary to become smart. The fifth dimension then assesses how far that city has come. How far has it already integrated smartness into different aspects of life within that community? And there are 5 levels of smartness that are assessed. core infrastructure such as smart energy and water management, facilities and buildings, core services, environment, and then external interfaces. So I've given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the different dimensions. As Piers and I mentioned, there's a maturity scale, and Piers is going to take you through that now.
Okay, so if you can imagine, as part of understanding those various dimensions and then the particular variables within them, which are identified through that survey, that enables organizations to be mapped on a level of maturity from zero, where they haven't started, there's no discussions taking place today, through to informal. There are exploratory steps taken towards defining an objective, through to documented. An objective has been formulated in working minutes or publicly communicated, planned. A plan to realize the objective is in place. So we're at the sort of nearly at the halfway point now. Deployed. A solution delivering against the objective has been deployed. Some impact. There is measurable impact and value generated by the solution. At the level 6, not at all of the, most, if not all, the solution delivers high value. And then finally, maximum impact at number 7. So there is no way the solution can deliver more value than what it is doing right now. So from a scale of 0, not started, through to maximum impact, where you could not possibly deliver more value than you are today. So, and everything in between. And these are the levels of maturity that we use to understand where a smart city, place, or a community actually stands today. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, to establish an aspiration for where they'd like to be tomorrow. And then that enables further analysis around how you're actually going to get there. I'm going to share with you a couple of examples of some of the outputs from that. So the diagram on the left actually shows the baseline maturity of that organization at that point in time, and then plotted against the desired state. So you can easily visualize how far or how close you are from that desired state. The middle dimensions simply show the level analysis across each of those dimensions, and then that enables some analysis to be done to actually identify over a horizon roadmap of the various initiatives that need to be put in place so that you can the organization can move from the current state to the desired future state. And if we just blow that up a little bit more, down the bottom left-hand side, obviously you have the current state where the organization stacks up today based on that assessment, and at the top right-hand quadrant you have the desired future state, and then you have the horizons across low, medium, and long-term, or short-term, medium, long-term. And you can see in the various initiatives or examples of potential initiatives of moving across that scale, right from a sort of, I guess, the most basic baseline of brainstorming sessions and solutions for better connectivity, but then up to more advanced capabilities around augmented reality for services, infrastructure, and the community sees clear benefits in smart city projects and improved climate change action, and so on and so forth. So these are some examples of initiatives that could be put in place to drive up the maturity scale to arrive at the future state. So Simon, I think what we're going to move into now is a bit of a mentimeter to see how people are tracking along some of those metrics.
Yeah, absolutely, Piers. Thank you very much. And I really like the anchoring of the model in understanding what the international standards are and connecting it to that. Mark, if it's okay, can we put the Mentimeter information up on the screen? Perfect. And people, please, if you see in the chat, we have the Mentimeter with a quick poll with the code 41512328.
Need some elevator music, Simon.
Well, you could do some karaoke for us, though.
Walked straight into that, didn't I?
This is how I say thank you to people who agree to give up their time and participate in these masterclasses. So, sorry about
As in invite them to a karaoke session, Simon.
that. Yep, absolutely.
Pierce and Simon, what are you seeing from some of the results coming through, the early results? What can you tell?
That people are really willing to be honest, and that no one's blowing their own trumpet by saying that they're all the way up the scale. Piers, what are your reflections?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it shows that the level of maturity of people in the meeting today are sort of in the first 50-60% of the maturity, as I might add, you would expect. So, you know, the fact that people are showing a spread across the areas that they are, I think you'll find is pretty indicative of an average, if you like, across the country. You know, I don't think there's anybody who's really kicking it out of the park at a level 7, for example, or indeed potentially a 6. You know, there's a lot of the initiatives over the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years in particular, obviously foundational part around strategy work, and then moving into proof of concept work, and only really recently moving into initiatives at scale. And I see we have one brave contender who's stuck their hand up at number 7. It would be I don't know whether they'd be brave enough to come off mute and explain how they're hitting it out of the park.
I'd welcome the discussion, but we might hold that off into the chat. Look, we've had over 50% votes now in this, so we might just move on to the next question in this. Don't be afraid to vote, but in this one, we really want to understand that in 3 years' time, where would you want to be in your Smart Places journey? So I'd encourage people to look at that from the sort of professional reflection as well as the personal reflection. Like a big part of that first sort of leadership and capability assessment is understanding the capability uplift that is needed to deliver in a smart cities environment. So yeah, please think about it from both the personal and the professional standpoint.
So, Simon, it as it's a general comment, it seems that the majority are in a hurry to have significant impact, which is fantastic. Aspiration to have significant impact within 3 years. Obviously, that comes at a cost. And an organisational structure that supports that, but I think it's a fantastic aspiration.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Piers, and I'd also reflect on the 3-year reservation that the New South Wales government has created for the Smart Places Acceleration Program, and I really hope that $45 million can really help to achieve that, the goals of getting to that really significant or maximum impact level that's been outlined there. I
Yes.
might just pause really quickly and ask first, Jacinta, what do you think? Are we being too ambitious, too conservative, or are we pitching this just right?
Look, I think in the context of what you've just said about the fund that's available and where people have placed themselves today, I don't think it's too ambitious. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for the different places to leverage off the success of each other. So if we are, we've got 8 votes there for level 6, which is significant impact. If we think about that, all centralized on individual places, we really can extend the impact if that's actually connected and we're leveraging from each other. I would just also reflect on the comment that Andrew's popped in the chat around sort of level 7. If it's the maximum potential, then is it a dead end? And I would say definitely not a dead end. I think your definition of maximum can always be sort of extended, so I wouldn't say that's a dead end, but maybe in time, and when we get to 3 years, we reassess what does maximum impact look like when we've seen a lot more progress.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jacinta, and I think it also builds on the discussion that Zoe introduced earlier about how maybe starting with one vehicle and one sort of technology to look at pothole development was the baseline needed to establish credibility, and so creating that virtuous cycle where you always expand what maximum potential is really important, so you don't hit that risk that I think Andrew's quite wise to point out in the list.
Agreed.
Zoe, I might just throw to you because I forgot to on the first question, and just say, what do you think? Do you think that this sort of ambition is represented sector wide?
Yeah, I think there is this ambition to be smart, but what I would say is that there'll be pockets within particularly councils, if I talk about councils, where they will be maybe level 7 on some things, or level 6, but to have that, I guess, overarching smart places to have significant impact in all the different areas, I think will be an interesting thing to kind of explore and witness, because as Piers rightly said, this stuff, it will cost money in the first instance, but hopefully will save us money down the track, increasing livability and all those type of things. But I do think it is hard to measure or not measure. It's hard. It's easy to measure if we have a baseline. So we really need to measure that baseline first, and then measure the impact of each of those different areas. But across the board, we may have an average impact of maybe it's 4 or 5 or 6. But actually, in those different areas where we've put that lens on and we're focusing in on, we can have that significant impact. I really think we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think that's a really great perspective. We might just move on now to our next question. And in this question, we really just want you to input your view on words of what you think the biggest challenges to achieving your objectives on your Smart Places journey. Okay, we'll just give people another minute to just put in the words that come to mind. Okay, we'll leave this open in case people want to drop in any other words. But Piers, I might throw to you and say, are these the sort of challenges that you're seeing in your work and in your role with the IoT Alliance as well?
Yeah, I think that I'm not at all surprised that leadership has come out as the number one item in this word cloud, because developing smart places and communities and cities is not just a project that's done on the side by the IT team or anybody else for that matter. In order for it to have meaningful impact across all the various different sectors, it requires leadership from the top of the organization down, and for it to be embraced throughout the entire organization. That is the only way that the maximum impact of 7 on the scale is actually going to be delivered. So yeah, absolutely. I think the second one there, interestingly, is around standardization. And standardization in some ways, I presume, comes to standardization of data. It comes to interoperability of data, which we know is a key challenge that needs to be solved for to unlock the maximum value. I'm a bit surprised that governance is so small, but I suspect that governance is actually wrapped up in leadership. So I suspect that's actually with leadership. But yes, largely, security is obviously a key, absolutely key consideration. It's certainly not the number one criteria, but it's absolutely mission critical, because if security is not taken care of, then we know what's going to happen.
Yeah, great. I think that's an interesting reflection. I'd also encourage anyone who wants to think a bit more about standards to go back and watch the masterclass on standards from a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was a really good one. Okay, we'll just move on to the next question now, please, Mark. So, what are your views, words that come to mind when you think about what your first or next move on the Smart Places initiative might be? Great. It's nice to see some specific initiatives, and it's also nice to see some ambition coming through around securing funding. A data audit. Yeah, that's something that we've kind of got going here in Department of Planning, Industry and Environment in regards to our data governance at the moment. But knowing what you have is a pretty important step, I think. Jacinta, maybe while we wait for some more responses to come through, and as they come through, can you think of places that people can go for advice on how we might deal with some of these, first or next steps? Smart parking and responsive wayfinding, I think, hitting pretty much your sweet spot in transport and technology.
I was going to say, Simon, is that a plug to direct people to come to Piers and I and Zoe for advice? Look, I think there are a mix of people on this call today, people who are actually responsible for delivering these and people who are experts in this field. I think doing the master classes that you are doing in the lead up to the broader conference is a great place for people to start to understand what's being done today and where to go to for more advice. But I think the other key thing is just linking back into the initiatives that you're running and the funding program that New South Wales government has in place, to really help kind of either kickstart those initiatives or start thinking about how you might go about it. And this word cloud, I think, really reflects what we saw in that first question of where people are at different stages in that development. So some are really kind of trying to get that executive sponsorship and securing funding, and others are thinking about some really, really great initiatives, and others are thinking far more kind of in a connected manner. So I think there's a whole raft of different places and expertise either on this call or in the broader community.
Yeah, great. I think that is an important point, and I think and my organisation is a member of a number of industry organisations in this smart cities space, and we find that we get a lot of value out of the resources that are shared, and I think it's a question that we should reflect on a little bit about best ways of learning from each other going forward. I'm really fascinated by these results, and it'll be worth having a bit more of a look at them going forward. In the interest of time, though, we might just kick on to this is me trying to crowdsource my job, really about understanding where some immediate applications of technology might be for people's cities or communities. Some interesting answers coming through on this around safety, public safety, waste, pet tracking, environmental monitoring, deploying sensor networks.
I'd like to know what a smart barbecue is, Simon.
I would encourage. I would encourage whoever. Zoe,
It
sorry.
it tells you if it's broken or not.
Righto.
Yeah, maybe it has free Wi-Fi. Maybe it cooks for itself. I don't know. No, it just it reports faults, so you don't have to have someone going out and checking it with the gas level and stuff like that.
Yeah. All right. Great. Zoe, what do you think? Do these applications resonate with you as where the narrative's at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. Public safety being a really big one there, and transport. I think public safety is obviously a huge thing. I think that it's coupling this technology then with design, urban design, and all those other things as well. So I think once we can understand some of these pain points, because essentially that's what we're talking about here, we can apply that then to different areas within our communities. I think one that I don't see on here is energy, and I think that's a really big one. We've done some work with a council in Queensland where it wasn't necessarily a smart city or smart community project, but looking at their energy use and bringing all that data together so they can actually better manage energy is a really key one. And yeah, so no, really interesting. I like that data management is on there as well, because I think sometimes we might think about the technology but not the data behind it.
Yeah, great. We've
have
still got a
some-
few responses coming in. It's nice to see water up there.
Oh yes, thank you, Peter Ryan. He's telling us about Smart Barbecue would have an IoT device that could be monitored, controlled, of course, by a smartphone, so you can find nearby a park where it has a working barbecue, etc.
And Jacinda, I hope your little one's okay.
Yes, we had a fairly serious incident just before Christmas. So yes, that would be my top feature for a smart barbecue.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we might move on from the Mentimeter now, and thanks everyone for your inputs into that. Really keen to encourage questions or comments in the chat and go from there. But I would just want to go back to a comment from Andrew Tovey in the chat around the semantics or the descriptions in the maturity model. Andrew, do you want to come off mute and sort of pose this as a question to our colleagues?
Thanks, Simon.
Good to see you.
Pedantic, and you've pulled me up on it. Look, no, it's just I'm really fascinated by the way these maturity models are created, and this looks great. So I'm just being pernickety, really. But yeah, the qualitative strength of significant and high value impact, it feels like that's more specific in terms of, you know, impact to end users, etc., than saying something has reached its maximum potential. Something that's obsolete has reached its maximum potential. It's not creating any value anymore. So it was really, I can see what you were trying to do. And I think that it's kind of obvious what you're trying to do. So people kind of just work with it, but I'm just being picky.
All right. Well, let me build on that a little bit into what I think maybe is a question. How do we use a maturity self-assessment and a qualitative tool like that most effectively to drive our decision makers to make investment decisions? You know, we saw funding and resourcing and things as questions. So I'll turn Andrew's reflection about qualitative strength and understanding that into a question that I'll ask all three of you about how do we turn this into an investment decision? Piers, I'm going to throw to you first.
Okay, so one of the really powerful things about the benchmarking capability is not only do you understand where you sit within the maturity, but you can also use it to benchmark yourself against your peers not only in Australia, but overseas as well. And TM4, and one of those data sets that we referenced earlier, provides that data, that rich database to do so. So if you want to understand as a community how you stack up against a comparable community that seems to be doing stuff really, really well and progressive, you can do that using this tool. Once you understand where you stack up and where you're potentially advanced, but also where you're lacking with that visibility, that enables you to put in place a plan to move forward on the certain vectors that you really aspire to move forward to.
I like it. And there's a bit of a compelling sort of competitive edge to this, of a state of origin feel or something like that.
Yes.
And so with that, I'll ask Zoe, the Queenslander on the call, to reflect next.
Yes, you'll have to remind me of the question because I actually want to ask Piers a question. Am I allowed to do that, or will you ask me the question again?
Why don't I ask you the question, then you can ask Piers. So my question is, how do we mobilize decision making around investment and commitment using these powerful and useful qualitative tools?
Yeah, great question. I think going back to the Moreton Bay example, I think that if you look at, that's just an asset management pothole project. It was really tiny to begin with, and what it's done is, I mean, it's not a tool as such, but they showed then that they could do something differently. And they saw a return on investment as well. Like, okay, well, we can see that where this is going. That's then spurred these other innovations. Now they're looking at stormwater, they're looking at buildings, they're looking at all these different things that they can do differently. They also tried, some little things here and there that didn't work so well. Like, I think one of them was around another council actually around, the checking in. They were using a card to check in, and they looked at all the data and they said, oh, well, does that change based on weather and all these other things? And can we shift people's behavior so then we're not all arriving at the office at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out no one really cares what the weather is. They all are doing the same thing regardless. So it wasn't really anything that they could move forward with. But I think if you've got something that says, okay, well, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, you can actually then convince somebody to do a baseline, measure a baseline, because I think that in this space there's still quite a bit of hype about what it is and what it isn't, but I think we are coming out of the trough of disillusionment where we're actually into, well, what are the real use cases? And if we can have a model or have something based on standards that we can actually say, well, this isn't just some new thing that some young person, millennials, come up with, it's actually real. I think that will be really, really, really powerful for leadership. But just adding quickly that you don't have to, I guess, it seems quite overwhelming, I guess, to start and just, asking all these questions and etc. But I think just starting now and starting to look at some of the resources that are already available, and maybe you do start a little pilot here or there, is really valuable. And then you can actually, build your strategy and all those type of things. I don't think there's one way, and we've all talked about this, there's not one way to do this, but different things will work for different communities depending on where they're at.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Zoe. Now, what was your question for Piers?
Good one. It was something really insightful about model. Yes, when you do this model with the different organizations, on average, where do people sit and how do they feel about where they sit? 2 questions.
Yep. Well, I guess most people sit fairly down on the scale. Is the reality, and for most people that is not a surprise, and that's largely because, again, coming back to the point that I made earlier, I would say over the last 5 years of let's call it the smart city movement, if you like, the first 2 or 3 years of that was really spent doing a lot of strategy work, developing a smart city strategy and a vision, and then it's been moved on from that to develop proof of concepts, and now in some areas going at scale. So really, we've really only been embarking on this journey properly in Australia for about the last 5 years.
Yeah, thank you, Piers. Thank you for that. I might just tweak that question a little bit and put it to Jacinta. So, Jacinta, if people do this assessment, score low, is it successful as creating a burning platform for change?
Simon, I think it's really, really helpful to create that burning platform. So if we think about what we saw in one of the word clouds earlier, the biggest challenge, that was leadership. And so by using something like this, you can really clearly show to your leadership where you are on a scale that is generally accepted and used by other similar places and cities. And so that can help you to really communicate where you are and what the outcomes you need to achieve. And then when you have been able to communicate that, you use that to secure your funding, you can then demonstrate the benefits realization. So I'm thinking here about the business cases that people have to write and demonstrating that benefits realization later. So I think they can be used as a really good tool to get what you want, which is that support and the funding, and then demonstrate success to be able to take the next step.
Yep. Absolutely, that's great. I might just now ask Sandy Burgoyne to ask her question that she's posted in the chat, and also thank Adam Beck from our Smart Places Advisory Council and the Smart Cities Council for ensuring we run our summit in June rather than July. So Sandy.
Thank you, Simon. Can you hear me? I've got my AirPod in. So it was really interesting to see the results from the Mentimeter in terms of where our place owners sat, and it wasn't surprising to see that. But I'll be interested in the panel's comments on how we, meaning, you know, Simon's team and other stakeholders, can work together to foster that collaboration between place owners at different maturity levels, particularly given we've got a summit coming up in July. And two outcomes for that. One, someone who's not started can learn from someone who's at a more mature stage, and from there we can actually increase the chance of that impact. So just keen to hear your views on how we might facilitate that. Thanks, Simon.
Anytime. Who wants to go first?
I'll take a first stab at it if you like. So thanks for your question, Sandy, and good to see you. It all comes down to, I reckon, sharing knowledge, sharing learnings, sharing best practice, sharing what works, sharing what doesn't work. You know, I think there has been a lot of individual LGAs over the last few years embarking on their own journeys, if you like. And in many cases, we've reinvented the wheel, LGA versus LGA, if you like, because we haven't had that joined up narrative or joined up knowledge base of what actually works. And I'm gonna sing the praises of New South Wales government because, you know, in most states around Australia, it has been this movement, if you like, has been led at an LGA level, which has been fantastic. But that has opened up the challenge of the ability of LGAs to actually learn from each other, know what works, know what doesn't work, so that we avoid wastage and we focus on initiatives that are genuinely delivering value. I think what New South Wales government are doing at a state level, and through the work that Simon and his team are doing in particular, it enables all of the communities and local governments in New South Wales to actually benefit from the overlay that the state is taking to help maximise the efficiencies and the benefits of that knowledge and insight.
Yeah, great. That's a really good reflection. I really like the comment that Andrew Tovey's posted, and would love, Andrew, for you to share that with the group. And then Jacinta and Zoe, I might ask you to offer your reflections in response. Andrew.
Thanks, Simon. So my comment was around, I've run a few projects with councils that are generally characterised by the same sort of limited period of pilot project funding. It's a pattern we see over and over again. Something happens, everyone gets excited, and then the project ends and the funding ends, and there's a legacy system. And either that legacy system gets dropped because no one has an interest in it and there's no money at all, or someone kind of works out a way to keep on muddling through. And generally what happens is that as that muddling through occurs, it's under-resourced. There's probably not the full set of skills you'd want in the room to really make the most out of it. And it's sort of run on a shoestring. And that's no one's fault. I think it's just a reality we see repeated. Now the challenge is councils have to keep going back and saying, okay, well, we're spending money on this thing, and people ask them questions like, okay, well, where's the value to our ratepayers, etc. So you need to demonstrate that value, but very often to demonstrate it, you actually need to put in more than that shoestring allocation that's being used to keep this thing on life support, right? Like it actually needs to be propped up and taken to the next level. And I likened in my model, in my comment, that you see this with sort of the classic business startup. You know, you get the cool idea and someone throws some money at it, but then you get that chasm and what's the statistics, like 90% of startups fail or something like that. And I think we see this with smart city pilots. So there's clearly a role here for state government. And this is, you know, if Smart Places is doing its job well, it should be engaging in this space. But I've also sort of said, you know, how do you avoid propping up lemons? Like, how do you pick winners? And how do you work to make sure that you're delivering immediate results now? But also, it's not just about delivering immediate results as well, because some of the things are slow burns, right? You might actually need to put in 5 years of collaborative R&D to get a really great result down the road. And yeah, so it's a tricky one. Discuss.
I can start if you want. I think the immediate results thing, I think that's what probably, you know, the early conversations about smart cities kind of ended up being, which was very, you know, what I'm putting this in now, what can I get out of this in the next 2 minutes? And I think you're right, it's not about that. If you do get some early results, like let's high five, but actually it's a medium to long term investment. Like anything, you're building a road, you know, you're investing in big infrastructure, you're thinking about, well, I'm not going to put in, you know, this water system, I'm going to put in the one for the community in the future. And we just have to think about digital and smart cities and communities in the same way. So I think we'll start to, and we're already starting to. But I also think, yes, there's the scalability going from pilot to full scale or whatever the case may be. That's kind of the whole point. And we need to think about it when we start these projects, because we also need to think about the whole life of the project as well. Even, you know, if we're buying these sensors, how long do they last? Then what do we do with them? Similarly with data, you know, you have to think the same. Am I council? Do I own the data, or does this company own the data? There's so many things that we need to think about and ask the questions about early on. And I think we're doing this now. We're doing this more and more. But yeah, you have to think about that whole project when you actually start that tiny little pilot, which unfortunately may stop the process. But if you've got I guess it all comes down to governance for me. And if you've got that person that's responsible for doing that thing, and it's not just doing that smart thing, it's actually, well, maybe they're responsible for energy, and now they're looking at new ways of, you know, making energy more efficient within a whole council or whatever the case may be, like that use case I was talking about earlier. Then you're not talking about a smart city project that has, you know, a life of, you know, oh, well, we install free Wi-Fi and now we don't know what we're going to do with it. We actually then plan that whole thing out. The reason we are doing free Wi-Fi is because we want to close the digital divide, and there's a whole bunch of other things that we're doing, but that technology component is just one of those. So I think it's about integrating the smart approach into business as usual. Yes, I think you need the headspace or the governance to start to do these things, you know, outside business as usual. You don't want somebody necessarily to be trying to do their main job and then on the side trying to, you know, improve things, like, you know, continuous improvement. But eventually it's all comes down to someone's responsible for that. Therefore it will get done. It's like picking up the rubbish. Like if someone doesn't come pick up my rubbish, I know who to call, and then it happens because they need to do it. It'll be similar with these digital initiatives. And if they are solving real problems or problems that we foresee in the future, then they shouldn't be things that we just forget about after we've, you know, cut the ribbon or high-fived about.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And I'd offer a reflection that thinking about the model under which you acquire the technology is important. And Jacinta, maybe without notice, I'll throw it to you to offer your reflections on Andrew's point.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think, you know, it's great making a start. And everybody has to make a start somewhere, but at some point you need to be starting to think more strategically. And I was just reflecting on something Zoe said when we caught up the other day, which was, it shouldn't be about having a smart places strategy, but your strategy should encompass elements of smartness. Zoe, I hope I've done justice to what you were saying the other day, but rather than having something specific, this is part of the overall strategic plan for a city, a place, a community going forward. And the other reflection I would have is that, this is very similar to what we're going through in just the IT world in general. We're moving from a project-based approach to a product-based approach. And the traditional models of funding and project delivery don't quite align with that, because when you're looking at it on a project by project basis, then you need to have a great big OPEX fund to keep it going. Whereas if you're thinking about it from a product perspective, then that is a thing that has a life. And that doesn't quite align with our CapEx, OPEX funding models that we all have to live within. And it's a similar challenge that everybody is going through in this world as we change the way we deliver technology and data.
I think that's a really great and insightful reflection. I'm taking out of that baking the smart story into the BAU of whole of government strategies and planning is a really important step from that. Now, I might just throw to Piers, and Piers, recognising you've had the opportunity to advise both New South Wales government and local governments in the smart cities, smart places context. What do you see, sort of in response to Andrew's reflection, as the primary role the state government can play in moving the agenda forward and making sure that risk of propping up lemons or death by 1,000 pilots isn't realised?
Sorry, the dreaded mute button. So let's address first of all the lemons question. So my view is that we need to be brave and embrace a culture recognizing that some investments need to be made on a no regrets basis, i.e. there will be lemons, and we need to accept that that's okay. Failure is a learning process. We need to capture the learnings, or capture the lemons, which are the learnings, i.e. the failures, and we need to share them more broadly so that others don't make the same mistakes. And that then talks directly to your question, Simon, that a key role that the state can play is to connect the dots. For all of the LGAs, to share what works, to share what doesn't work, amplify the stuff that is working, and encourage other LGAs and communities to adopt it. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity for New South Wales government to play that key overarching role, not in an overbearing way that really takes over the responsibility from a local community. That's not the intent here, but really to provide that insight, that encouragement, and indeed some seed funding as well to help that along the way. So embrace your lemons.
That's great. And Sandy just in the chat had a quick follow-up question for you, Piers.
Piers, I know you've got so many great ideas. I was thinking, what are some practical solutions to that? I just sort of think about the Smart Cities and Suburbs program that was rolled out by the federal government and the subsequent collaboration platform that they still have in place. That hasn't really hit the mark. I'm keen to sort of hear the panel's perspectives on what could New South Wales government do differently to really engage and get that knowledge sharing happening, which you said was critical for that maturity progression. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my view. My view on you're referring to the federal government Smart Cities and Suburbs program, the $50 million or so from 5 years ago, I assume. And my view on that is that was a great initiative to seed the movement, but it ultimately resulted in a whole load of point solutions across the country. And I think that New South Wales government recognises that and is taking it from a completely different point of view to really provide that a joined up approach to to smart communities in New South Wales. So it's a question, I guess, for Simon in terms of what is the approach that DeepI is planning to take to capture all of those insights for the benefit of the local communities. Maybe there may not be an answer for that at the moment, but it's an interesting discussion to take.
Well, perhaps Zoe might have some perspectives on that from her international study about what they might have done overseas where there's been multiple local governments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'd like to draw two parallels. One is to just like basic boring project management, which is like the finalization. You know, we did project management 101, and finalization never has enough money. No one's ever around, no one ever sticks around to actually do the finalization. So projects never get wrapped up as well as they could, which includes sharing a lot of those learnings. So I think if we think about, well, actually let's invest in finalization, which means we've planned out, we've got the activities already planned. You know, when we have all these amazing projects happening, what are we going to do at the end? Maybe it is a conference, maybe it is a big workshop where we share learnings, etc., or maybe it is a real platform where we can collaborate and really share those things and learnings, and also some nice content that people can really engage with. And the other thing from the Churchill Fellowship is even just not the learnings from the international travel, but actually the process in itself. When we got the fund, you know, we got the fellowship, we had to then say how we were going to share that information, and then we were able to do that. So we also have conferences and things, that type of thing, but we had to say, well, we will write the report and we will, you know, share on social media, and, you know, I will share on my podcast that I've done this, and in every conversation I have, I will tell people that I am a Churchill Fellow, and I will tell them about my trip because it's so great and they want more people to apply for it. So I think that's really an important one. It's just like getting that, just, you know, we're all humans at the end of the day, so starting to really share that information. But the US has done it quite well in their Smart City Challenge. Now, granted, they had 50 million for one place, so, you know, they were well funded, but I went to Smart Columbus because it was Smart Columbus, and it was all about smart mobility. So, you know where you need to go. So they've got the experience center. You go there, you learn about electric vehicles, etc., etc. They had the baseline where they went, no one knows about electric vehicles in our community, or whatever the case may be. I don't know, 12% knew about electric vehicles. Now, after 2 to 3 years, whatever it was, now 50 or 60% are actually considering, you know, moving their private vehicle to electric vehicle, or whatever the case is. So I think there's actually, looking at that finalization and then really telling people what we're doing about this, and don't be shy about it, and also telling people about those really small things as well, because as much as they, you know, may not land on a grandiose scale, they're really important to be that catalyst and then invite people into the conversation.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I think anyone who can get access to your Churchill research will benefit from it.
And Simon, I might just jump in as well.
Yeah,
and
please.
I was just reflecting on when we worked together on the Smart Places strategy a little while ago, and the work streams that you set up, I think were a really powerful way of making sure the different groups were sharing information, and that was coming together. So in chairing the New South Wales government work stream of that, the amount of sharing that happened and learning and discussions between different departments was, I just think, phenomenal. And a lot of that got fed into that strategy, continuing those sorts of groups. And we've definitely heard today the bringing together of those different groups is really important. I think one of the really strong themes I've heard so far is that need for state government to work closer with and support local governments as well. So how do we do that? And I'm sure, again, that's another plug for your conference in June.
It is. And actually, I think, Jacinta, you've really addressed the question that I was actually going to solicit and direct to you from Luke Musgrave, who leads the policy and engagement team here. And that was about the most useful resources we can develop. And I think some of those groups or communities that we had, we had research and academic institutions, we had an industry group, and we had local and state government groups was really helpful. So I think perhaps reinstating or reinvigorating them might be something we consider. And probably from my perspective, looking to partner with the industry associations to reach their members through those forums is probably the way I'd prefer to go, so that there's that create once, use many times approach.
And Simon, just picking up on Luke's question as well, I think one of the other key resources that we could look to create, and I'm not sure if Ian Opperman is still on the call, but that those standards taking a leading role in the development and endorsement of standards, and not necessarily government starting from scratch and creating them, but really endorsing standards so that there is something that everybody is working towards, guides on, how to bring things together, how to approach the kind of key components of your strategy and delivery. I think those would be quite useful things. And I'm sure there are so many people in this community who have a lot of those resources that they would be really willing and able to share.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really helpful reflection. Now, Andrew, coming back to you, this great question about having a baseline, having a minimum that you have to measure up to in terms of adopting some of the standards before you can get a co-investment in some of these pilots. Give us your reflections on that, and whether you think we could get that off the ground as an approach.
Sorry, you just caught me out because I was just typing another comment. So sorry, which was about standards?
Yeah, and about having that sort of minimum level that all projects must measure up to.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, this is something I'm dealing with, particularly around the work I'm doing with low-cost air quality monitoring and urban heat monitoring. And at every level, there's a lack of standardization, from the devices through the technology to the way you deploy the devices, the way you capture data, interpret and abstract it, label it, manage it, share it, etc., etc. And at every single level, we need new standards if we're going to start to use this new data for all the wonderful, exciting, world-changing things that people say we can use it for. And that's the biggest barrier for me. And I guess what I'm looking at here is you've got a lot of pilots, but they're all being done in this void of no standards for the most part. So when they come out, everyone's just sort of made it up as they went along. If you had a situation where at least we got some standards in place, yeah, you'd have a proliferation of pilots, but at least they'd all be sort of vaguely singing from the same song sheet, right? They'd all look slightly similar, and you could come along with some different agenda or some different people when a pilot's finished, and pick up those threads and turn it, do it. You might do a big hard right angle or something, but you'd be able to take it somewhere else, as opposed to it just being a little bit of a smorgasbord mess at the moment. So that's a big one for me, I think.
Look, I think it's absolutely a challenge that we must grapple with, and Piers, with your IoT AA hat on, I'd invite you to provide a reflection on that. And you've muted yourself.
I was trying to unmute. Yep. So yes, as you know, Simon, I am a passionate advocate for trying to solve the thorny issue of interoperability. it needs to be solved on a global stage, because, Andrew, coming back to your point, if there was a simple standard that we could all rally around that was sort of agreed, fantastic, that would make life a whole lot easier. But I agree with you, it is a bit circular until such time. The IoT Alliance has recently reconstituted its interoperability work stream, which is seeking collaborators now, both here in Australia and also overseas, with organisations such as BSI, and Simon and Ian have very kindly offered to help us shape the terms of reference for that, because in order to solve for this, it requires a collaboration. It's not going to be just a few people sitting in a room who actually nut this out. It requires broad collaborators. So I guess that is a call for, for people on this call who want to lean in and help solve that thorny issue. Get in touch with me, and I will hook you in. I'll introduce you to the new chair of this work stream, because it's an issue that we need to solve for to really unlock the maximum value.
Yeah, great. I think that is a really important point, and it comes back to my point about we should invest our time and effort in working with those industry associations that bring together all of the parties in this ecosystem. I think we might be running out of a bit of steam here, so I'm just going to ask each of my panel one final question. And so, Jacinta, we've talked about maturity of smart places, but we haven't talked as much about mobility as I think we might have in a session like this. So what are your thoughts about how important mobility is in assessing the maturity of a city or community?
Thanks, Simon. And interestingly, it was one of the things that came up as the most quoted area to start with in our earlier Mentimeter. So I agree. I think transport is really the backbone of any community. Unless that place wants to be completely isolated, then mobility is the key to success of a place. Now, you might say that we in Australia are quite happy to be isolating ourselves at the moment, but within the country and within our places, then mobility is crucial and critical. And it can be as simple as good public transport, or it's making sure that traffic flows seamlessly because it's powered by data and insights, and it's able to be responsive to changing situations or incidents. Now, again, this is a really good example of where state and local government need to work together, because, of course, a lot of that at a macro level is a responsibility of the state. But at a micro level, there are things that cities and towns and places can do to ensure that their area runs as smoothly as possible, and that those micro issues are understood, identified, and addressed. And that could be smart parking, or it could be monitoring to understand why visitors might be parking in a certain area and directing them to somewhere better. So it's about integrating that and really bringing those elements of mobility together. And I think that's really what a lot of people think about first when they think about a smart place, is that smart parking, smart mobility. And so those steps, I think, are far more powerful when they're integrated and there is collaboration between those different levels of government and private enterprise as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong reflection about the need for the whole ecosystem to be involved. And as a recovering transport planner, you're speaking to my heart when you're talking about mobility. Now, Zoe.
Can I add to that, Simon?
Yes, but I'm going to ask you your question first.
Okay.
What are the 3 things we can do to get started with smart places and communities? And then please add.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so 3 things, because a lot of councils and other people ask me, well, how do we actually start? And I think we talk a lot about, we've talked a little bit about pilots, and I think I've talked about do them, but think about the whole project. But actually where we first need to start is in our mindset and in our language, because when we're stuck in saying, oh, well, this won't work, or we've always done it this way, this can't happen, no amount of smart technology will help us, because we get stuck in this like impossible brain. And I've thought about this a lot because I do a lot of things, and when I'm trying to write master's, data science uni assignments, if I'm in my impossible brain, there's no way I'm going to move forward, because I'm in such overwhelm. And I think it's the same with people looking at these smart places and smart communities. So with our mindset, our language, we have to really bring that in from the very beginning, and that's what we work on first. So the opposite of an impossible brain is a possible brain. So we believe that it's possible first, and that things can be different, and then we work out those steps to actually make it happen. And then we keep saying it and repeat it again. Now, this doesn't mean that everything will work. We will have those lemons, of course, and it may not work the first or the 16th time, but as we go, we have this mindset that it can, and we learn from it, whether it does or it doesn't work. So I think that's really important. And with language, when we talk, like, our language is very powerful. So the words that we use, because it's our language that then ends up in, policy, and weaves its way into decision-making processes and into our strategies. So I think language is really important there as well. So that was two things, or one thing combined. But I want to talk about making yourself big. Like we're talking about smart places, smart communities, but actually we can look across borders. We may be one council area, but actually the border, people don't go, oh, okay, now I'm in another place. It has to be seamless across that border. And I also talk about Queensland and New South Wales as well, but this smart region approach. So then you can actually partner with your neighbours, and then you have a more scalable system potentially. You can talk about those things like interoperability across borders and that type of thing as well. So I think making yourself big is important if you need to, and I think that a lot of us need to, even if we aren't necessarily having the same project or whatever across borders. Actually sharing that information across borders is really key as well. But then also sweating the small stuff, like we've been talking about as well. We don't have to do big, massive projects, but we can do those really small ones, and then keep telling people about it, I think is really key. And the last one is about sharing your stories and telling people. We're talking about learnings. So really looking at how we can share, and sometimes it will be a big conference, but other times it will be a peer-to-peer sharing, because it might be, really dirty information about the consultant that you don't like because they did something really bad to you in your smart city approach. But you don't want to necessarily be sharing that in a massive forum. You want to share that with your other local government peers, and then work out what we can learn from that and what we can do to move forward. So I think we really, mindset and language, make yourself big and sweating the small stuff, and what I call show them your knickers, which is letting that airtime of your dirty laundry, but in those forums that's right for you. So it may be local government to local government, state government, or it may be sharing those massive learnings across in a really big conference or something like that.
Great, thanks, Zoe.
Oh, and on smart mobility, I just wanted to add, we really need, I think a smart city is one that is, or a smart community, smart place is one that is walkable, that we can access public transport. And I think I read somewhere, we know it's smart when the rich people are catching public transport, because it's accessible. It's, everybody's catching public transport. So I think I just wanted to add that to the mobility conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to finish. My final question to the panel is to Piers. What's the project or program that's gotten you the most excited in terms of seeing it move up the spectrum of the maturity journey?
Oh, I could call out a couple of things here. I think that Newcastle's doing fantastic work around this space and in driving their maturity. They're certainly one of the outliers. And then internationally, I look at cities like Amsterdam and what they're doing. There's so many different pockets of maturity, if you like, across the various different dimensions of the smart city stack.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Piers. I think there's a lot in that I definitely agree with. Looking closing 10 minutes, 12 minutes back in people's lives, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this discussion today. Thank ACS for the ongoing support, and Piers, Jacinta and Zoe, thank you very much for sharing your perspectives. I think as we go on a journey around maturity models, we're thinking about connecting people, that safe space to share openly. We're thinking about making the most of the knowledge available by sharing it effectively, maximising benefits of the investment and measuring that, celebrating our wins and forward progress, and being mindful of our language. And then really in the end, in the Smart Places space, this is a story about building momentum. Mark Portlock's done an awesome job again, and he's put in some links in the chat around the presentation slides and also the link to the Masterclass YouTube channel where the recording of this session will be up to date. So I'd like to thank ACS again for the partnership, encourage everyone to have a look at the upcoming Masterclass schedule and look out for our save the date for the Smart Places Summit that we're planning for late June. With that, I'll say thank you again and good night. Cheers.
Thanks. See you later. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.